item, so you can make public comment on anything that you like for 5 minutes, but we are not going to be able to take this on.
I want to know that you're working on that and that we are going to continue the conversation and work towards that win-win solution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other public comment? Seeing none, move to item 3. Fiscal Constraints Workshop. Presentations by Mitch Dion, General Manager, and Jeff Meyer, Director of Public Services.
And Director Davidson's coming through the door right now, so as we organize ourselves here, we'll just do it slowly.
Okay. We're going to slowly move into position.
We're slowly moving into position.
Good morning.
Okay, well, we'll move ahead anyway. This, I'm not sure we've even titled this right, in terms of a financial constraints, so much as really a preliminary step in doing budget development. As we've looked at the budget, the staff is moving forward in our budget development process, and one of the key components of the budget is actually the board's oversight and the board's involvement in doing budget development and making sure that the financial administration of the district is moving to the trend consistent with the board's vision. This year we have a unique circumstance because of our rate increases of last year and fencing the money appropriately for the repair and renovation programs. We really have great insight as to what our revenues are going to be all the way through the 2017-18 fiscal year. So this is ultimately talking about what financial constraints we're dealing with from an administration perspective as we transition into the future. So with that, let's see if I can fire this thing up again. With that, what we have is everything's moving except that one up there.
The one behind you is.
Yeah, go figure that. So I'll have to just talk off the one behind me. Today is really about talking to the board of directors about your vision, your priorities, and keeping it in focus with what we think are our financial constraints. So ultimately, going forward, this is about hearing from you all as to your priorities and how it fits the vision. We really have a pivot towards infrastructure. Last year, the focus was all about infrastructure. It's all about addressing our backlog of repairs and renovations that are needed. It's all about the programmatic delivery of projects. And so with that pivot towards infrastructure, we really look at the O&M budget a little bit differently. There's another element that's going forward, which is a continuum of the inertia. A couple of years ago, there was a strategic business plan adopted by the board. Many of those items weren't addressed. The funding for it didn't fall into place. There were things about that though that still had traction, and we've been working on them internally to one degree or another. We're seeing certainly a redefinition of several key positions, and we're seeing certain efficiencies towards our maintenance management, data-driven decisions. So you'll see some of those themes that came out of that strategic business plan repeating themselves here today, and then ultimately, how does the long term fit the, what's the end game here as we talk about today? So moving on, what we want to do is set a picture. Jeff, can you set the picture here and tell us what we're looking at?
Certainly. As you're aware, the current rate structure capped our regular water and sewer rates. And the additional funds coming in is only for capital R&R. So that kind of boxes us in on our revenues available for operating budget, our O&M budget. We have water rate revenues, water consumptive revenues, you have sewer revenues, you have property tax revenues, and you have other revenues that come in to support our operating budget. In the 13-14 budget, those revenues amounted up to about 17.6 million, 12.1 on the water side, 5.5 on the sewer side. That includes the property tax money that's split out and goes to the operating budget, as well as other revenues. We don't see any significant growth in the number of connections currently as we project out over time, over the 3-year period. We may get some developments in, but the way we're looking at it, we're not going to get a significant enough bump to raise those projections. Also, in talking to the county treasurer tax collector, they don't anticipate any significant increase in tax revenues over this year and going out into the future 1 or 2 years. So what we're looking at is flat revenues for operating. The other thing that's going to come into play too is, and this is kind of a wild card right now, is the drought. If we have people cut back on their water consumption, you could see a decrease in the consumptive rates, revenues that we receive. So when we look at that, coupled in with all the other economic factors, I don't anticipate any significant growth on the water or sewer side. So we're kind of capped at that 17.6 million. So all our operating revenues have to fit under that cap.
What we also have happening at the same time is we're going to have a continued growth in certain areas that really are not discretionary. We've seen salary costs go up by about 6% during the last 2 or 3 years. We've seen other benefit costs go up, correct me, Stacy, other benefits went up 8%, about 8%. And so what we're going to see is those non-discretionary areas that really are big chunks of the budget, by the way. The salaries and benefits is our biggest portion of the budget at just almost $9 million. Then you're going to see our utilities. Our utilities is about $1.2 million. Those are certainly going to continue to go upwards. We're going to continue to see our other large expenditure items in the O&M have to do with repairs and miscellaneous contracts. Those are continuing to go up. So ultimately, the non-discretionary types of fixed expenses are going to eat up a bigger chunk of the total budget, and the total budget won't be growing by much. And so that's the constraint that we within the administration are dealing with here. Some of those costs involve the regulatory. We're seeing our fees all go up. Certainly, you'll continue to see more of the shift from the state to our local governments. The O&M budget, employee expenses, healthcare, retirements. Again, part of the retiree benefits includes retirement health. That expenses continue to go up disproportionate to everything else. Our energy costs, we know we're going to see another significant bump in our energy, and supplies and materials are still going up. We hope to transition the O&M from a response and reactive to a more proactive maintenance program. And we hope to address some of our unfunded liabilities and unfunded initiatives and lingering liabilities. We've talked about cleaning up some of those things that have sat out there for a while, some of these facilities that have been left that haven't been closed up or sealed up. So ultimately, those are some things that we have to deal with. Meanwhile, the CIP or the R&R program is going to continue on independently, because of the guidance of this board was to go deliver those projects and don't touch that money for anything else, and so that's what we're sticking to. So within the O&M budget, it's going to require some different kinds of approaches. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about alternate revenues a little bit. Jeff's hit on new development. There's a potential for future expansions. Certainly, new development is going to be sparse, but it will get started again. Expansions, those are often just revenue neutral anyway. Grants will continue to pursue, but all those things take a fair amount of energy and investment in order to get them seeded, to get them started, with the exception of potentially new development. So ultimately, seeding these other initiatives for alternate revenues is a tough position to be in, because it takes energy and resources to get there.
What was the subscription service?
Well, we've talked a little bit about maybe doing some different kinds of things that we haven't done before, like service line repair behind the meter, or such as being able to do other types of programs that can be paid for by reimbursable, even if it's a matter of putting people into different kinds of business modes than we've been in the past. The meter reading, maybe we could be reading meters for other entities. There's other things like that. It's just out there, it's a category. Any other questions? Okay. We do have some inertia. And again, like I had said earlier, some of these were actually out of the strategic business plan, but the inertia that we're facing is our safety regulatory compliance. There was a drive for efficiencies out of the business plan, effective communications, employee development, and certainly turning on a customer focus. And so we're seeing some of that we've been able to do. You know, we've got a new org chart that we're developing, and that includes a new community relations customer service manager. So that's going to help us address some of our customer focus issues. One of the key initiatives we see in our safety and regulatory compliance area is the need to address the facilities and repairs. We have a lot of facilities, many facilities that we haven't kept up with addressing the occupational health and safety requirements in them. The facilities themselves have assumed a different function than what they were intended to do. And so we see those as potential issues that we have to address. Those we can work on mostly with our minor capital program, but it's all about restoring those assets to a serviceable life. Preventive maintenance, again, it'd be a continued thing, is many of our facilities haven't had the attention and the preventive maintenance that they needed. You see the lack of paint, you see the lack of detail and upkeep, and so we'd like to get on those, again, as a way to preserve the asset. In the category of efficiencies and cost effectiveness, Jeff, a lot of these came out the strategic business plan, if you want to.
Yes, they did. What we're looking at here is, at the first time, is benchmarking. We suffer from a lack of quantitative data that will allow us to make very good business decisions. And when I mean lack of, it's accessing it and having it useful in a useful format so that we can get it, say, monthly, get these statistics monthly, to be not having to invest a lot of time and resources to do a lot of data entry and repetitive data entry to be able to get this data to make our decisions. And one of the focuses of the administrative services group that I'm heading up is data management. And we will be mining the data in the new systems. We've got an updated Springbrook system that we're going to be able to utilize. It's a little bit more user-friendly for reporting and extracting data. We're looking at ways to look at consumption, looking at our revenue side on the ratepayer side, identifying cost of service in certain areas so that when we get to the next phase of our 20 by 20 or by how we're looking at in the future, we have quantitative data that can drive us in making solid decisions. The other is we don't have a good way to do surveys of our customers and internal and external performance measures. Those are things that we're looking at to be able to drive our view of how we're going to progress and move forward. We want to shape our future. To do that, we have to have good data and good information. We want to make sure that we know what's going on internally and externally and come up with processes internally that can meet and shape where we're going to go forward. Surveys will help us do that, whether it's on the customer service side, whether it's internal, how one department is serving the other, how we're working out in the field. We can do it by performance measures, indicators, which is standard throughout a lot of government agencies. It takes time, it takes effort, but what we're looking at doing is to have it as automated as possible so it gives us the data, but it can fall within our limited resources. And like I said, our administrative services, we're going to be looking at making things more accessible through data management. That segues nicely into database and information management enhancement. We're looking at different ways of doing business. We want to automate some of the processes, take the repetitiveness out of those processes, try to cut down on the amount of times people have to touch individual pages and pieces of paper and file, just to make it easier and less repetitive. We're going to be looking at the purchase order system, which is very repetitive and very labor intensive at this point. We're going to be looking at board packages. How can we get those completed out there in a much more efficient manner, and also records management. This is going to be our biggest challenge. We have a significant amount of data and records in paper, in file cabinets. We've been here for a long time, this district has, and a number of those documents are all in paper format. How do you bridge that gap from moving from a paper-centric record system into a more electronic data management system? And obviously there's going to be a crossover where something, paperwork is just going to have to remain paper. But what we're going to be doing is moving towards a more electronic data-driven management system, record management system, so that as documents are developed, instead of printing them out, walking over to the filing cabinet, sticking it into a file where somebody will have to walk over and retrieve it in the future, we'll do that all online through databases. And so that going forward, documents that can be done electronically will be stored electronically. Obviously, that'll cut down the printing, but it'll also cut down the amount of time people have to extract that data. So if customer service at this point has questions from a customer over the phone regarding their file, they have to get up, walk over to the file cabinet, pull it out, and pull out all the data that has been collected over the years. That's going to be all electronic. They can access that from their computer. Work orders that can be generated electronically. We're just going to be working smarter and try to cut down on the amount of wasted time. That's kind of the way I look at it. Maintenance management system. I mentioned work orders and proactive maintenance. This district has had several attempts, start-stop attempts, at creating a tracking maintenance management system, whether it's for field work or internally. We want to take those attempts and really put it to work this time. Find out what will work, make sure all our employees are trained to be able to utilize it, see the benefit of it, and move forward. Like I said, there's been several start-stops for a number of reasons. We know what those reasons are. Doesn't mean we can't overcome those and move forward, because I think we have a new inertia behind us where people are now more familiar and more comfortable with technology, and they know that it can benefit them. In addition to the maintenance management system, we're also going to have to invest in our GIS. That's been a start-stop process as well. We were working up until about 2009-10 in updating it and trying to get current on our GIS, and then it just kind of fell apart when we had cutbacks and the economy fell down and the cutbacks in the engineering department. Those cutbacks affected the GIS effort. We want to get that going as well. And SCADA is not my area of expertise, but from what I've been hearing and what we're looking at is we want to make sure that in SCADA, obviously it does its job, but we're extracting data that is useful in projecting, reporting not only to the state, but also using it as a management tool for operations.
Ultimately, with the SCADA, much of our SCADA has been oriented to keep the operators, to satisfy the operational need, but it doesn't have data points to pick up energy points, to pick up flow rates, to pick up other things that are actually useful if you're going to have some cost accounting that boils back down to specific pieces of equipment. So SCADA is an enhancement. And the other thing on GIS is there may be an opportunity where we actually work with and partner with the county and not try to have redundant systems. There's other GIS systems like Ducks Unlimited and some others that have some overlays into our county that are very elaborate and also very useful. So it's not as if we have to take and start fresh with the GIS system.
Question? What is GIS?
Graphic Information System. It's a powerful tool to bring representations and integrate your relational databases so that you can actually take that components of information, take that data, and then bring it out as information.
And to follow up on that, there was some previous efforts to identify the location of lift station, pumps and things like that, and identify them. And we have that information, it's just integrating it into the system. There still needs to be some more work, but again, it's a start-stop and we want to get it going again.
Is this an update to our strategic business plan or a new strategic business plan?
Neither. This is the fiscal constraints that we have to deal with, at least from the administration, that we're proposing in order to get us to where we're going to be in 2018. I mean, the strategic business plan as it was had many of these issues went through, but the people that were here, the organization that were there, it's all changed, and so ultimately it doesn't really fit the constraints or the confines of the strategic business plan, but we need to take the good things out of there and pull forward with them.
And can we get a hard copy of this?
Sure.
Cool.
And ultimately, Don, is the end of the day, this is, as I'll repeat, this is what we think we're working on and ultimately, it's got to be shaped and molded by what you all feel is to be done with the priorities that you have. So this is simply, at this point, we're kind of telling you where we're at and focusing, but we're certainly, when we get to the end, you'll see how we're really going to say, hey, you're either on track, or maybe shift this here, or do you want to see something different than what we've got here? So we're trying to move through this and get you there. We see another important issue, which is effective communications. Again, we have done some things organizationally, but we see a campaign approach, an integrated approach to dealing with our media relations. And there's tools that we have, the Consumer Confidence Report, the website, social media, and newsletter. It isn't really not expensive additions. It's just going to take the attention of a person who has those skill sets to address. Internally, we've talked about an internet for quite some time, and also an internal newsletter as being an effective communications tool. Those are objectives that Stacy and I continue to work on, and I think now we have the ability to actually maybe deliver, at least on getting an internet type of communications tool internal for our employees. And it's really important because we have a lot of employees that don't ever come here. They need to get the word, and so the mechanisms to get them the word is key, and these are two tools to do that. We can't talk enough about employee development. During 2014, we're going to see several retirements, some key positions. There's going to be a focused effort on some knowledge transfer that has to occur. And that takes time, it takes energy, and that's why I'm telling you all that. It's a deliberate process because ultimately, to deal with what we have to deal with, we're going to have to deal with some consolidation and development of new positions. When people are moving on into retirement, we're not going to likely backfill those positions with exactly the same kind of job descriptions that they had in the past. And that takes a fair amount of effort. Stacy has new job descriptions she's developing continuously, and ultimately we're trying to make sure that we get the right skill set for the business. Ultimately, we've got to address the business culture. Sometimes less can be more. This is really an exciting opportunity to actually work within 3 years of knowing what we've got, and then focusing on getting the right people. We can teach skills, but not attitudes. So it becomes a matter of focusing on the right people doing the right jobs and getting out forward with it. It's got to have a data and information-driven decision set. those have to take measurements. If you cannot measure it, you can't manage it. And ultimately, we look at the amount of management reports that are available to us, and it's been pretty diminutive. So we're really working on trying to develop those. And it's a matter of being proactive, and proactive in a lot of different areas takes a different kind of energy. The other key thing that I feel is a key initiative is addressing the emergency response. Right now, we have crews that are terrific at going out and fixing leaks. They get lots of practice, but perhaps that's not the best skill set that we should be in. But that's where we are right now because that's what we have to do. But ultimately, as we start to look at the emergency response, it's one of the things that will define the success or failure of an agency is how well we perform when we have a major incident. The hillside in Washington was just a great reminder, a great wake-up as to some of the risks and vulnerabilities and how the communities respond and get people, qualified, trained people on site to address a major incident is key. With that,
how often do we, because we have a hazard mitigation plan, how often do we update that?
the hazard mitigation plan, which just was adopted about a year ago.
5 years.
Every 5 years, that was our most recent.
Yes, we work through the county and coordinate that activity.
Did the county ever accomplish one?
That I don't know, however, they did attend all our meetings and they had their input into ours. I'm not sure the status of their plans.
I don't know that they have.
Yeah, I don't think they've wrapped it up, but the,
I have a copy of theirs, and there's.
Is it adopted?
It was adopted. Well, you know, I'm not sure if the
Oh.
board adopted, but I do have a copy of theirs.
Yeah.
And theirs is a year older than ours.
A year older than ours?
yeah, so it
So
wasn't,
it's recent, like last week?
2 years ago, 2 years ago,
So
no,
when was ours?
last
a
year.
year ago.
Yeah, you don't.
Almost a year ago,
Oh, so it is a year older.
Ours is a year younger, I guess.
okay.
But that's the most recent iteration. It had been done 5, 6 years ago.
So how does that integrate with what you're talking about?
A little bit. Ultimately, I think that sets off the relationships in a major incident, and I think that's important. But I am talking more specifically even within our own agency, because it also drives what's your base level of staffing. Are we going to have enough people to address 2 major incidents at the same time simultaneously, or do we staff up so that we address one, engage one, isolate the second? And ultimately, how does that number crank into the total number of people available, and what does it look like? Those are questions I think are still to be answered. You know, if we've got obligations because of the county's plan to have certain people and equipment available, do we have that? And ultimately, we have agencies in the county that are really dependent upon CCWD having a bit of excess in order to address their needs. And I think at the end of the day is that's fine and dandy, but if we're looking at a world of tight constraints, y'all need to know where those excesses are and who's relying on them. Because
It seems to me the only, I mean, our most obvious hazard is gonna be, you know, catastrophic fire. And it would seem to me that we're gonna have to rely, or at least figure out a way to count on some of our adjacent counties, some of the other larger agencies, and also be able to assist them in that sort of scenario.
certainly, but that's part of the broader county response. Since we're not a fire district or a fire agency, it's not a primary driver for us. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think it's exactly right in terms of what you're gonna engage in. I'm talking about things that really are our issue. What happens if we blow out a hillside because we had a pipe that had been leaking for 30 years up there we didn't know about, and suddenly it slid across a community? So we have kind of 2 ways to look at it. Those things that are much bigger in the community and our role to support that, and then literally looking constraint internally of things that we potentially may be the lead on as opposed to the supporting role. I think you look at it both ways, absolutely. And then I think I personally would like to see us get into a mode where we do a little bit more independently on exercises and drills, twice a year. What happens when we call for people? Right now, we don't need to do that so much because we have breaks and we respond to those breaks. But if we're successful in reducing those numbers of breaks, the frequency of the response of how do you pile on to when you have an incident happening? Did you fill out the right forms up front so that we limited our liabilities? Did we take care of that response and isolate it the way it should have been done? Those are questions that I think the only way to really test or to get into exercising and drilling. Customer focus, we really have got to, I don't think there's anything up there that's in the customer experience column that is a question on anybody's mind. Water conservation, it is part of our future. Ultimately, it also becomes a way to push customer service forward when you can start to offer water audits. When we start to be able to demonstrate water smart, fire smart landscapes. And then ultimately, if we lean into rebates as we have, those are ways that meet our BMPs in order to achieve what's appropriate to address water conservation measures going forward. Ultimately, we have to have some measurements of our customer focus. And there's two that I've suggested, perhaps you all would have some different insights, as to whether or not there's trust and whether or not there's satisfaction. So we think that this is a deliberate action. It's going to take energy and resources to make sure that we're doing it well. We have some additional considerations. Energy services is an important piece of work that we're working on. We have our water resources development pieces from the Headwaters project, Meridian Mine, Stanislaus River modeling. These are a couple of our contemporary water resources issues. And then the continuous, the IRWMP processes for both the MOC and the T-stand. So these are some resource efforts that we have to continue to be engaged in, or that we're planning to continuously be engaged in, unless we hear different from you all.
On the IRWMPs, is there still an ideal in the mill to do a third one with just the Stanislaus?
I feel that yes, there would be certainly moving the Stanislaus independent of the Tuolumne, and perhaps even maybe grouping the Calvares to at some point would be appropriate. But we need an independent IRWM for the Stanislaus in order to decouple Tuolumne politics, Tuolumne County politics, from what occurs on the Stanislaus. And additionally, it's to leverage our position for our hydroelectric plant. It's also to address the future FERC obligations and leverage those requirements that are going to be coming for that, and how to ultimately bring money to bear.
Well, I understand the benefits and the reason why doing it. Is it in the mill? Are we working on it, or is it an idea?
Certainly, it's would be one of these additional considerations that we have to commit time to this year. Yeah. Okay. It's a great point.
I'm assuming water management project or something. What's the IR?
Integrated Regional Water Management.
Integrated Regional. Thank you.
Okay. Ultimately, this is where we think the long-term benefits are. Staffing levels are appropriate for the business needs. It's really looking at what those essential governmental functions are. That's the traditional way to do a analysis to address where we're at, which is limited resources and covering what's essential. I think that the emergency response plays right in there and looking at our vulnerabilities. We have to look at our equipment densities to support our core functions. Right now, we have a lot more equipment than what's sustainable. The O&M effort to go with all of our equipment is not going to be a long-term not going to be sustainable long-term. We've gotten a fair amount of equipment. The last 6 years or so, we've bought equipment that was badly needed. But similarly, we haven't moved things on that probably we should have moved on. As a result, we have a really high level of equipment. Some of that is going to be just geographically required. If you've got to move rocks, you know, and you're up on Ebbets Pass, maybe that means that you have to accept that you have a higher level of equipment density than other places because you needed to have something that could haul those. You might have to have certain pieces of equipment, but we've got to go back and look at that because right now the O&M effort for our equipment isn't being achieved. And that's a problem. We've got to have a contextual framework to leverage privatized innovation.
Mitch, stepping back, regarding equipment, just to get an understanding, do we have too much equipment?
Yes.
Okay, and is it, are we moving to a point where we don't need all these same pieces of equipment in 5 different areas of the county, and what in equipment is the idea? How will that be being addressed?
Well, I think long-term, we're going to have to see what we can really afford to maintain. Because if we have equipment, when it's new, you can skimp a little bit. Long-term, though, that gets you in trouble. The equipment becomes unsafe, or it's just totally inoperable, and ultimately ends up in a boneyard somewhere. And we have a bit of that's occurred.
So as equipment gets older, we let it retire, and ideas of not replacing it, just using a similar piece of equipment from a different part of the county?
It's also getting the right equipment in the right places. I mean, we have a backhoe that we purchased not so long ago that was larger and more hefty than a lot of what we had, and ultimately it fit the need because we're out digging holes through rock that we wouldn't have dug before. And so certainly at this contemporary time, while we're doing a lot of lift station wet well digging, it's maybe a better strategy than having leased something for a prolonged period of time. But when we get out of that mode, before the total value of that equipment's gone, maybe it's not the right equipment that we need. We're seeing many excavators that can actually do so much more than what they did, so that may be a tool that's different for us in the future. It's a matter of making sure that our equipment, within the right periods of time suits what we need, as opposed to what we've done is we've bought a lot and just hung on to it. And ultimately it's not getting maintained. And by not maintaining it, then when you do go to use it, it may be subject to failure. And there may be value out of it that's also worthwhile capturing.
Just getting back onto that though, I've always been, a big supporter of making sure we have plenty of equipment, and primarily because our alternative is like you said, leasing or hiring subs. So when we get down to that, I mean, I'm gonna want to see some cost benefit. Want to see some proof that owning this equipment, which has always been, in my private business, if I can own it, I'd just as soon own it myself, and because it gives me, access whenever I want. I don't have delays. You talk about emergency response, things of those nature. That all becomes part of it. And you have to have the equipment at your available. Particularly, we can't be necessarily trucking something from Valley Springs up to Ebbets Pass and have a timely response. I can remember when I think we had a backhoe up at Ebbets Pass. It was an old piece of junk, and we always had to. And that may still be the case. I don't know. I don't know exactly where all of our equipment is. Do you guys?
We have equipment spread out throughout the county, primarily focused on what's needed in those various places, but we also have a collection of stuff that probably should have been moved along. And the concern is when somebody sees a piece of equipment, if it hasn't been maintained appropriately, it's a problem. And ultimately,
When someone sees it, what do you mean?
well, when they start to operate something that hadn't been maintained. And so we don't want to see injuries or accidents, and also it goes back to having more equipment than you need. I mean, even as a business owner, if you've got an asset that represents more value to you sold than it does by sitting and aging, you're probably going to move it on. And so ultimately, as we look at our total equipment density, I mean, I'd venture to guess that that piece of junk backhoe you referred to might have been replaced, but we probably still kept it.
Perhaps, yeah.
And that's just the habit that, you know, we just, and then it's also some of this equipment, like right now, you know, during the next few years, we're going to be cutting to rock. We're going to be addressing wet wells. Well, we kind of need a certain kind of equipment to do that. But there may be a 20-year gap after that before we do a lot of that, and maybe that's before you take a total evaluation of your equipment. You know, a good piece of equipment, it's 8, 10 years old, it's been used well and maintained well, has value. And if our work plan doesn't call for doing a lot of that at the end of that period, maybe we transition it out and it gets something different. It's like small excavators right now.
That's also dependent on our construction crews doing all of the work. I mean, we don't want to go buy a piece of $110,000 piece of equipment to do a $50,000 job. I mean, we have to make that, judgment.
It's exactly making sure that we make those staffing decisions though, that they fit with what we're going to have for a work program. I mean, without the R&R program going on, it'd be tough to say what are we really doing with a construction crew. But now we have work that will be continuously fed and kind of flow through, and we know what we can take on in capacity. The next one is just innovation. We really need to make a focused effort on innovation. The kind of discussion that Director Davidson and I are just having, I think really gets back to innovation too, is what do we want to do that's different, that's new, that's balanced? Because we have a different demographic or different topography up here, that we have to address the needs of, and that's going to take innovation. Do we have the appropriate methods and materials? Are we dealing with things in the most efficient way? Have we adopted a bit of a privatization type of mindset and asked those hard questions? If you were in business, how would we do it? Consolidation of facilities, I mentioned earlier, but it's really, my focus here is we've got to eliminate some liabilities, some things that have been lingering out there, some facilities that are no longer used and haven't been properly abandoned, closed up, turned back to the land, back to the underlying landowner or HOA or whoever it should go back to. We've got a handful of those to address. And so before I get to really open it up for y'all's questions, this is the bottom line is we've got to deliver efficiencies to offset about 1.8 million of fixed cost expansion during the next 3 years cycle. So that's our focus. And that lines up well for preparation for the O&M budgets of 2018-19, which I'll point out is right before we hit the SB 7XX timeframe, and figuring out how we're going to address those obligations, ensuring that would satisfy.
Explain those obligations.
It's the 20 by 20 water conservation reductions, and it'll be the next generation. It'll be the next generation of it, which is basically saying, hey, if you've got anything above 120 gallons per capita, the state's going to look twice at you in terms of grant fulfillment and other obligations. So they're changing the program. They'll continue to tighten that up. It's getting our finances in order. Jeff, if you want to talk a little bit about those.
Certainly. As you look past the last 6 years that I've been here, I think we've done a very good job of budgeting and identifying how we can meet the needs of funding this district. But more along the lines of being reactive. When we look at financial statements, when we look at budget status reports, it's generally been a look backwards, historically. When we prepare budgets, we've been looking at how are we going to meet our needs within a certain ceiling of revenues. With the anticipation in years past that we'd be seeing rate increases or additional growth or additional funding sources, because we've always thought that the revenues in the economy would get better. Well, now what we're looking at is more of stagnation with a little bit of growth, but we have even a more immediate need to make sure that we fund our ongoing cost increases. As Mitch said in the past, we have salary increases, the MOU increases that are going to start kicking in. We have, obviously, PERS is going higher when they talk about how they've changed their actuarial values, whether it be their smoothing process or how they look at mortality rates. Those internal changes that PERS is making is driving up our costs. We look at our OPEBs, which is other post-employment benefits, medical insurance that we've retiree health. Those costs that we do an actuary study every 3 years have been creeping up. So we have a lot of pressure, and we have our regular operating costs. We have electrical costs. Larry really hasn't been doing his job on CPPA. He's allowing them to increase our rates. And so we have costs that we know that cost of doing business, just like in any sector, is going up. How can we manage that? Well, we want to take a more long-term view of how we're going to work within this 5-year rate plan. And what we're looking at is we have, going now 5 to 7 years on the forecast, you know, you can do it, but how effective and how accurate is the years 4 and 5? What we're and 6 going out in this for the years. What we're trying to identify now is what are we going to look at through the end of the fiscal year 17-18, knowing that we have just a block of revenue, and what are our needs going to be. We want to be more proactive. As I mentioned, we want to shape our future. What that's going to entail is a lot of data, a lot of information, a lot of hard decisions. And I know I've come before your board many times over the last 5, 6 years talking about we have hard decisions to make, we have hard decisions to make. Well, we can't grow ourselves out of this. We can try to find new additional revenue sources, but they're not going to be significant enough. We really have to become more efficient. And as you've heard earlier, we have opportunities, retirements. There is a definite grain of certain jobs within CCWD. Lynn has retired. Vince is going to be retiring. Chris at AP is going to be retiring. We have people who we can look at and find a way to be more efficient and maybe reshuffling the deck as to who's doing what in a way that really now meets our needs going forward. My task going ahead is to shape a financial plan to work within those parameters, identify where we can come up with savings, but what's going to be even more important is those ideas are going to have to be driven off of data. And it's not just 1 year moving forward. We're not going to have 21% savings in this fiscal year. It's going to be a target we're going to have to work towards. And you know, sometimes we're going to be able to make a little bit more headway than others, but it's that strategy that we're going to have to develop and keep with it. I'm looking at utilizing some of the retirements this year. We're going to have a little bit less in the capital O&M. We still have our debt service obligations. We still have all those other O&M obligations. But that's kind of the strategy we're going to look at. We're kind of looking at how we identify our costs in water and sewer. We've had a historical viewpoint of basing our sewer costs on the percentage of connections of sewer versus water. Is that the right way to do it? So what we're doing is when we allocate our costs over time, it's been historically 74% water, 26% sewer, because that is the split of number of connections. we're going to be looking at whether or not that is an appropriate way to allocate it, but to do so, we need data that we don't have right now. And then when we're looking, and that drives us to the last bullet point, data-driven decisions. It's going to take us time to get there, but we have the resources in place, people who are excited to be able to look at ways to move us forward. It's just not going to be a one-year fix. And that's why I'm making sure you realize we're looking at a 3-year program over here to get to where we need to be. But we will always be measuring our success, coming up with our goals, measuring our success. Where are we? How have we achieved it? Have we achieved those goals? And if not, why not? What have we done? Was it something with our analysis? Is it something with our follow-through? Or is it just something else that we didn't anticipate? Readjust that and move forward. But the ultimate goal is at 1.8 million in 3 years.
With that, this is a great chance to open up to questions or comments, or particularly if there's anyone in the public that has a question or comment.
Okay, we're going to ask for public comment first, after the presentation, or any public comment on these issues or this issue? This is the opportunity. Seeing none, open it up for board discussion. Go ahead, Don.
The data-driven decisions, I realize that you don't have the data to make those decisions at this point. Some of this is short-term, some of this is long-term. Are you going to give us reports in terms of what you're achieving as far as the different things that you're trying to measure?
Yes.
Okay.
And you're right, we have short-term and long-term goals. I believe that most of the data is available. It's buried in multiple systems. It's buried on multiple pieces of paper. But what we're going to create is a strategy on the information we need, identify what the needs are, and then create a plan on how to mine that data to get it. And then see, once we put that in place, to see if it's actually meeting our needs and if it's meeting the user needs. And as that program progresses, we will be reporting back and showing you our successes and where we still face challenges.
Do you see a process in order to prioritize which directions you're doing first and which is long term? I mean, I'm guessing there's 10 things, and maybe there's 100. I have no idea, but some of them may be more important than others.
Some of that will fall out through the benchmarking process, but ultimately it's really some basics. How much does it cost us to treat 1 million gallons of wastewater?
I know I've got at the last finance committee meeting, I brought up the concept of wholesale water sales, and we didn't have the data in order to address the concept. That may be something that could be a lucrative thing in the real near future. That I wouldn't say should be a 5-year project. I would say that should be more like a 5-minute project. I mean, where we get added revenue is what the board is interested in doing, so we don't have to raise the rates. So if we can do other things that are tied to revenue, I'm all excited about those. I appreciate the efficiencies, but additional revenue is the #1 thing on my list.
What we're looking to do
We're
is...
just taking it, we don't have the answer. We take the comments down. We're trying to hear from them.
Yeah, we just had, and that's what I was going to say. We were
Okay.
going to identify all those interests in the data requests, and then we'll identify those and prioritize those.
Do you, can you tell me what, in the 23rd, I don't have a copy of the budget, so can you tell me what the CIP portion of the 2013-14 budget was?
Within the O&M budget, or within the R&R?
O&M,
You're talking capital outlay?
CIP.
Okay, CIP is not in the O&M budget.
Okay, then where is CIP?
It's a separate budget in its own.
Okay, so how much did we have budgeted last year for CIP?
That would be in a separate section, Mitch. And I believe initially it was only maybe $500,000 to $600,000, just off the top of my head, because we didn't have a number of projects that were moving forward. That was rate increase, so we didn't have our R&R program identified at that point.
Right. You think $500,000, $600, $500,000 or $600,000?
Yeah, that's all there was in there.
Yeah. Now, that will change over time because it's over our capital R&R program.
Well, doesn't that automatically just roll into R&R?
Your CIP program will include parts of R&R, but not, there could be other projects in the CIP program that are not R&R.
Can you give me an example?
Master plan updates, expansion-related projects.
Capacity enhancements.
Capacity enhancement projects.
Okay.
Those are items that have been traditionally in our CIP program, included in it.
But as far as historically, our CIP was more in terms of digging holes in the ground and putting stuff in the holes. It was projects. We just haven't had any money to fund that forever.
That demand, and it's all cyclical. In the late 90s, early 2000s, we had significant developer-driven projects. And so those have been part of the CIP as well. So it's a balance in there, and so you have capacity enhancement projects, and right now you'll have the capital projects.
Okay, as far as policy is concerned, should we clarify that now that we have R&R and CIP?
No, it's all part of the one. It's pretty much within our policies it addresses it.
Well, I just don't want to mix and match, is what I'm saying, is the R&R money is in this pot, and the CIP is in a different pot, when they don't mix and match, as far as my belief.
We track them independently,
Okay,
and that's what it comes down to.
okay, so we're real clear in terms of that.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, the other part of it is too, there's some, in the past, there have been some projects that we have done that have a component of operations and capacity enhancements. So we've been tracking those separately as well. So we're very adept at tracking these costs and keeping them isolated.
Okay.
And when we budget for them, we identify them as the funding source. So when you see your budget and when you're adopting your CIP program, it will show the funding source, and those funds will be identified from capital R&R, both on the water and the wastewater side.
So are we going to look at, I mean, you gave us maybe 6 or 8 pages here. Are we going to have that as a list that we're going to monitor and keep track of, or is this a one-shot deal, or how am I going, 6 months from now, how am I going to remember what we talked about today?
Well, ultimately, the budget will reflect these priorities, at least the proposed budget we'll be bringing forward. So ultimately, from that, you'll see where these get called out. But more importantly, it goes back to making sure that we're hearing from you right now, because we're in the budget development process. And so this is reflecting what we believe we're doing with the forecast as we best see it in the next 3 years. And ultimately getting your input and saying, okay, well, this is okay, but it should be tweaked because you lost sight of an independent stance loss. Or yes, it's okay, but it should have been tweaked because we didn't pick up just to make sure that you have a reporting methodology here for this. So we've got to come back to you on some of that. And certainly a copy of the presentation is one methodology, but really, as we structure the budget, I would really like for those things to become so transparent that you know that this is tied back to this conversation today.
Okay, no, Director Dean has a comment, but before we go there, Director Stump made a comment about, instead, a lot of focusing on expenses and reducing expenses here, but additional income generating projects. Can you be more specific on are there projects that you're seeing as that income that could derive, or income could be derived from, that put those actually on a list?
Yeah.
Okay. You want to talk about those today?
I don't think they're appropriate today.
Okay. Go ahead, Director Dean.
Yeah, well, you dropped the term 120 gallons per day per customer, which is significantly different than the current thinking of 2 connections, 2 households per acre foot per year.
I haven't seen 2 households per acre foot used by an agency. We don't use that anymore.
Well, I know we don't, but the point is, I was just reading some study the other day that used that metric.
Yeah.
At 120 gallons per day, that's talking about 7.5 households per acre foot per year.
Yes.
I don't think that's realistic for us. And the reason I say that is because, you know, we don't have apartment complexes that are just strictly indoor water use. Most of our places are single homes, even with drought tolerant planting and stuff like that. At a minimum of 200 gallons per day, that's about 4.5 households per acre foot per year, which I think would be an achievable number for us for future operations. But the point I'm trying to get to is that's going to have a significant impact on our fiscal issues. And even though we may be reducing the quantity of water we're using now, to get to 120 gallons per day is not realistic, and I don't think that it really using those numbers would put us in a different place financially that I think will probably skew these numbers. And what I'd like to do is achieve what I think would be a realistic number for what Calaveras County, in particular our agency, may be able to deliver on a daily basis.
And what the background of 120 is that ultimately the usage above 120, if you're going to be in that 120 range or so, that's going to be used for grant eligibility. Doesn't mean that your goal might not be something higher, but if you're not going to be in that range, your access for grants in a normal competitive world may be entirely different. We certainly still have the disadvantaged communities that we're within, but next year we'll be developing a new urban water management plan. The guidance for that new urban water management plan really has moved that whole program entirely different from where it was just a few years ago to something entirely different. But ultimately, if you take a look at, say, the total number of connections that we have, and you just do some macro math across it, you're going to see our water use per connection is pretty low, actually. But it goes back to our population with so many vacation homes. And so those types of things also get factored in when you start to do an urban water management plan. So it'll be an interesting target as it gets laid out.
Well, I agree with all that, but the only issue that I have is, the 120 gallons per day is an urban standard. And it's a classic issue that we've been dealing with since day one. It's a one-size-fits-all standard that it's a mold that we don't fit into without a lot of cramping and a lot of discomfort. And what I would like to see as we move this process forward is, an emphasis on addressing the issues of conservation, which I think are critical, but also allowing and making efforts to begin to remind the people in the rest of the state that we are not the same as they are, and we should be judged by a different set of standards. And that's a time-consuming process. It's probably an even longer process than the one that we're talking about now. It goes out to 2018. So, but I think if we're going to be talking about these efficiencies and these money savings, then I think at the same time we need to protect ourselves by carrying on this conversation, so we're not going to be held to a standard that we can't fulfill.
Well, again, it's the standards depending on what thresholds the state feels its roles and obligations are. Again, for us with the disadvantaged communities, it'll be different. But you're right, it's an urban standard. Long term, how that plays out for us, hard to tell right now. Once we have the final guidance on the urban water management plan update, we'll see what that plays into.
I can give you a suggestion on how we may be able to begin to address that. We can talk about different standards, different kinds of conservation. One of the issues that we've been developing over the last however many years is addressing how we manage our headwaters. And there's a conservation aspect to the headwaters management that I think we should take a leading role in. And that hopefully will have some impact on the minimum standard that they're going to hold us to. If we can demonstrate through our management and our suggestion of how these headwaters are managed, whether that's through U.S. Forest Service, whether it's through private entities, but it would be a public-private partnership, which would include CCWD, we should be able to address different conservation standards. So that's where I would like to see this go.
Sure, absolutely. And again, part of our rate structure as we currently do is, about 12% of our rates, is that correct, Jeff? About 12% of our revenue is attributed to usage. And so right now, with that rate structure, the way it currently plays out, that's something we look at in the future rates as well, is how it plays out. But really, it's that the ability for the state to support funding in a uniform fashion, and the one-size-fits-all model, I think, is the message that we have to go back to. Says it doesn't work. It doesn't work for more arid communities. It doesn't work for rural communities. And we'll see how it plays out. That's certainly good input.
Any other comments from the board? Any other ideas?
Well, my only comment is, I certainly agree that we need to be talking about revenue. Every time we talk about conservation being critical, we lose money. So I think we have to strike a fine balance. I was talking to a guy that owns a nursery the other day, and he's like, people are coming in, they're like, I don't know if I should buy this plant, and his business is suffering not because of what we're doing, but it's just the general state of the state and all the media talking about, because there are areas that have significant drought challenges, and we could very well have one, but I don't think we're going to have one this year. And so, I always get frustrated when we talk about reducing our usage. To me, it's contrary to our fiscal stability. I think constant revenue source of usage is, I think, better than hoping we can get grants by reducing our usage. We're going to lose money on the long-term side, hoping that some agency is going to come and help us down the road. I think that's backwards. So I'm interested in having that discussion. I know that this is an important subject, but I still think we've got some master plans that need to be redone. I'm really concerned with Rock and Tennis Sewer and where we stand now that we have a discharge permit, how that affects our capacity fees, because I think that probably, as far as my knowledge of what's going on in the county, is the most obsolete master plan we have now, because we don't have a huge land acquisition component any longer. At least I'm not aware that we do, now that we're working with the golf